Welcome back to The Haunted Beard, everybody. My name is Jake. Thank you for joining me once again. Today, I want to give you some thoughts on a new horror film that just dropped called Stopmotion. And this also includes some stop-motion animation elements into it. I got some thoughts about it. Let's get into it. So Stopmotion tells the story of a stop-motion animator who struggles to control her demons after the loss of her overbearing mother. And so I found it a bit lacking in its execution. It doesn't really elevate it or add a whole lot of depth to the actual story and to the movie itself. So the film starts off and we meet our main character played by Aisling Franciosi, who does a pretty solid job in the movie. You may know her from previous movies like The Nightingale. And we quickly learn that the relationship dynamic between her and her mother is not a healthy one. There is definitely some, I would say, emotional and mental abuse going on here. Her mom is very just demanding, controlling, and just downright mean. And so she is this woman who has basically lived her life up to this point to please her mother. She hasn't learned how to be her own person. She doesn't really have an identity. She doesn't have her own voice. She pretty much just purely lives for her mom. And she is living in the shadow of her mom because her mom is this legendary stop-motion animator, and she has these aspirations to hopefully one day be as successful and as well acknowledged as her mother is. And so really stop-motion plays out as we are witnessing this young woman on the verge of a psychotic and mental break. And this is the feature film debut for director Robert Morgan, who has a handful of other short films to his credit that are stop-motion animated films. And so he really has some talent when it comes to the stop-motion sequences in this movie. I like them just from a purely visual perspective. Some of the puppets and the dolls and stuff like that he makes are pretty creepy. And so I like this aspect just from a purely visual and a conceptual perspective. But overall, I don't feel that the stop motion animation aspect really added a whole lot to the movie. For 90 minutes, we pretty much just watch her mental deterioration get worse and worse. And for the most part, I found it all kind of surface level. And that's really the entire movie. And yes, there is this cool aspect with the stop motion animation, but for the most part, it's a pretty familiar type of story as we are using mental health to tell a horror story, which we have seen many times before. And to me, this one doesn't really do all that much different than many other films like this. For the first hour of the film, I found it largely devoid of really any sort of suspense or tension. There's not really any sort of horror or scares to be had whatsoever. There is some decent ominous and creepy atmosphere, but there's just not a whole lot going on here. I found it a little bit slow. Some of the elements of the story I found kind of predictable. I mean, you can pretty much kind of fill in the gaps. You realize that this is a story ultimately about a woman whose mind is just continually deteriorating until you get to the end and something really bad's going to happen. And again, I just feel like how the stop motion animation element was used, it just didn't really do a whole lot to enhance or elevate the story beyond, again, this is just a woman whose mind is slowly going crazier and crazier kind of thing. I just kind of found the vast majority of this pretty underwhelming. It just didn't really have much of an impact. I just didn't really connect with it all that much. I will give the film some credit though. It does have a couple pretty strong sequences, but like I said, the majority of it is just kind of underwhelming. There's a sequence that happens a little over an hour into the film that I thought was executed quite well. Again, it brings the stop motion elements into the live narrative. I thought that scene was executed quite well. Again, there is some good visuals here. I do like the design of the puppets. I did think the climax was pretty good, and mainly that's because it felt like we finally were getting a little bit of a payoff. We finally get some actual horror elements. You get some, I'll keep it vague, just say some pretty good kind of body horror stuff. And so overall, I just kind of felt disappointed and, like I said, underwhelmed. And we have seen stories like this that use mental health as a means to tell a horror story. But this one just kind of felt mediocre. It doesn't really do anything that we haven't seen before. Yes, I know the stop motion animation element is different, but like I said, it didn't really do enough for me to kind of elevate or enhance this above many of those other like mental health horror type movies that we've seen. Anyways, those are my thoughts. I think I'm just going to be middle of the road, 5 out of 10 for this. So it was a bit of a bummer. I thought this one looked pretty solid. I was excited for it. I really wanted to like it. It just didn't quite land and quite connect with me as much as that I hoped it would. So those are my thoughts. Hit me up down below. Let me know your thoughts if you've seen this. Would love to hear from you. That is all I got for you. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and do not click that subscribe button unless you want to be haunted by the beard.